Hello everyone, my name is Terra, and this is my applied nutrition project that I presented for you this semester. So as you can see, the two different species of choice, technically same species, but very dual purpose here. I decided to go cover the beef side and the dairy side as well. So for the dairy intro, so for my scenario, I'm originally from California. I grew up dairying in California. And I know there's not a lot of dairies out here in Oklahoma. So for the scenario, I decided to go in California. We're gonna keep it pretty close to what my home is. And we're gonna say we're milking 2,500 head with 3,000 total head. Our nutrition is gonna be based on the local availability of byproducts and feedstuffs that we have in the area there in the Central Valley. If I were to dairy in Oklahoma, it'd be very different than what we have back home. For the beef side, so I decided to go, out of all the beef sectors that I could have chosen with, I really do enjoy the feedlot, and I think that has to tie in a little bit on beef on dairy, and that's just what I'm knowledgeable about. But for this, it's just, we're gonna say that it's probably finishing 1,000 head of black-hided cattle. For this scenario, I decided to stay local and say it was in Oklahoma, since I know in our applied nutrition lab, we did go out to the Willard Sparks and we got to tour the feedlot, and we learned a lot about feedlot in classes as well. And so our nutrition is also, once again, going to be based on local forage and byproducts. What grows in California doesn't always grow in Oklahoma, vice versa. California is big. We have really good soil in the area. We're able to grow a lot of very diverse crops. Here in Oklahoma, it's known as a livestock state because we don't grow as many diverse crops. Okay, we're going to start with the anatomy of bovine. So, ruminant animals, as most of us know, they have one stomach with 4 different compartments, digest forages much better than monogastrics, and need a balance of forages and concentrates. So you can never feed them just forages or just concentrates. Okay, so this is one of out of the 2 favorite things I had to pick in the class to talk about. I really do like the anatomy of bovine and ruminants, especially. I like talking about it. People who, grow up with dogs and cats may not know that we do have ruminant animals in our livestock area, and in my opinion, are the best recyclers that we have on planet Earth. I know a lot of people, especially back home, like to get in an argument about methane, but comparing to the methane argument compared to how much they do recycle, I see a clear winner in it. So the rumen is obviously going to be our biggest compartment. It's going to be our fermentation vat. So the cows have microbes in their stomach, and we call them bugs. They're not really bugs, but they live in a symbiotic relationship inside the rumen, and they help break down that really fibrous material, all those refuges. And those long stem plants, even short stem plants, they're all gonna get fermentation in the rumen, and that's what allows ruminants to digest forage much better than monogastrics. And then, yes, the microbial bugs. Next is the reticulum. The reticulum is pretty cool. It's a honeycomb-like compartment of the stomach. And what it is also known as is the hardware stomach. If cows, say we're baling alfalfa, and for some reason there's just a nail in the middle of that field, and when a baler comes and picks it up and the nail gets stuck in a bale, cow, if they were to ingest that, what's gonna happen is that it's actually gonna go to the reticulum and it's gonna stay there. So I know whether we're on the dairy or whether we're in a feedlot situation, I know I've seen a lot of practical uses where people will bolus a magnet down into the reticulum of the animal. So in case they do digest a foreign object, most likely made out of metal that can't be broken down over time, it's going to attract even more towards that reticulum. The omasum. So the omasum is a little bit different than I think most of the other compartments of the stomach. It's made of almost long, wavy, smooth, kind of very tiny ridge-like material. Its main purpose is to absorb water. It also helps in that digestion process along with the rumen, however, not nearly as much as the rumen. And so as our food's going down, it's gonna start in the rumen. If it's not a foreign object, then it won't go to the reticulum. It's gonna go to the omasum, where once the big finer pieces are broken down into finer particles, the omasum is going to try to absorb as much water as it can before leading into the abomasum. And the abomasum is what we call the true stomach of bovine. It functions very similarly to monogastrics. It's going to have the enzymes and everything else to help break down those really fine particles in order to get ready for absorption once we get into the small intestine, large intestine. And so it's very, very important. It's very important to know on our dairy situation that cows, well, baby calves, so they actually, their abomasum is the majority of their stomach when they're born. Now we know as being probably 6 months and up post-weaning, we don't do that in dairy, but in beef feedlot we would wean, because in dairy we would take them most likely a week after so we can capitalize on milk production. But what they have is, it's mostly the abomasum, and that allows them to drink milk. Because if they were born with 75% of their stomach compartment being the rumen, they would not be able to drink milk. It doesn't make sense. We're not going to ferment that milk. We want them to go straight to the true stomach. We want them to get as much calories and everything else being able to digest in order for them to start out the best in life. And we need that colostrum as well, where the rumen wouldn't allow that to take place. It chemically digests food rather than mechanically. So as the rumen, we know it's fermentating. It's a little bit more mechanical in a sense, not completely mechanical, as there are the bugs in there as well. But what's happening is, even in the abomasum, the only thing that it is doing, it is digesting before absorption when we hit the small intestine. Now we're in the small intestine. This is where most of our nutrient absorption is going to happen. So as we learned in last year's class with Dr. Carter, the small intestine is actually made out of 3 individual pieces: the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. I probably mispronounced the second one, but those are going to be our 3 parts. If you were to actually measure a bovine small intestine, it would stretch out to 40 to 45 meters long. And for some people, I know that's pretty hard to believe until it happens in class, and it reaches around the whole classroom. So what it is it's coiled up in there, and it goes round and round and round and round, and then if you were to take it out, it is 40 to 45 meters long. The large intestine. So similar to the omasum, yet different. The omasum, the similarities, they're both going to digest or absorb water. However, the water that was not absorbed in the omasum, that made its way through the abomasum and through the small intestine, is all going to get digested into the large intestine. And we know that it connects to 3 things. It is the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. So that is our exit way through the animal and the anatomy of the digestive tract. And it ends with the large intestine. Okay, so going back, we're going to talk about some nutrients. First, we're going to do our dairy scenario. So what we're going to do during maintenance is when they are dry, so usually 2 to 3 months out of the year, we want our cows on the dairy to be lactating at least 9 months out of the year. And so once they stop, they have their calf, they go to peak lactation, and they'll start slowly peaking out gradually. And once we get to a point where we are probably 2 or 3 months, 6 months in gestation with a new calf, we're going to take them out of the milk barn. We're going to put them as dry cows. And during this period, yes, you do need nutrients in order to keep that calf growing. However, they are dry and they aren't milking, so they're not at risk of ketosis. Usually you just feed alfalfa and that gets you through. Now in lactation with dairy animals is very different. So again, that peak chart, they're going to have their calf. They're going to go about 3 months, hit that peak lactation, and gradually kind of tail out. And what that's going to do is, while we're feeding these animals on a dairy, we really want to incorporate our silage. Our silage is high energy, and that is exactly what the girls need to produce milk on the farm. If they do not meet these requirements, most likely they will go into ketosis, and when a dairy cow gets into ketosis, it's really hard to snap them back out of it. And then undegradable protein converts more to milk production. That's my second favorite thing I like to talk about. Is that's actually something I did really enjoy in this class and had no idea about before, is the undegradable protein that will actually bypass most of the energy requirements used in the ruminant animal and go straight to where it is needed in the animal. So on a dairy in peak lactation, I think it's a really good idea that we feed more undegradable proteins. I think that it's proven to convert more to milk efficiency and milk yield. All right, so now on to our feedlot nutrients. So obviously our diet is going to be very different than our dairy. However, we're still going to need a very high energy diet. And what this is going to consist of is mostly concentrates. We still have to have a little forage. You want at least 10 to 25% forages and roughages in your concentrate diet when you're in a feedlot scenario. However, this very high energy diet is going to go in one end and come out the other, and it's going to be not as easily digestible. However, the energy that they do receive and the growth that they put on is going to be a lot better than if they were just on roughages. If they were grass-fed beef, they finish months and months after a grain-fed feedlot steer would. And again, we're going to when the feedlot steers, feedlot heifers first get to the feedlot, what we're going to do is we'll probably most likely put them on a 10% crude protein diet. And every 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to keep upping that percentage. So I've seen it fully grown, finished steers, maybe on like a 25% crude protein, all the way to like maybe a 40. I think that'd be pretty pushing it when it comes to the concentrates. It just depends on the operations goals and functions and what they see as reasonable to feed. What is my time at, Jack?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Okay, so our dairy feedstuffs. Again, in peak lactation, we're primarily going to feed silage. Our dairy back home, and in this scenario, I would say too, if we were in the Central Valley, predominantly we're going to be doing our in-house farming and chopping of our own silage, and that's what tends to make most sense on most dairies where I'm from. And what that's going to consist of is it's going to be corn silage, so it's not dent corn, it is dent corn, but it's not going to be our sweet corns or our what us as humans typically think of husk corn sitting on a dinner table. It's going to be very, very different. It is made to grow fast and taste good to cattle. And so what we're going to do with that silage is we're going to chop it and we're going to put it back in a big old pit in the dairy. And what we're going to do is we're going to move the pit up and up and up with tractors. We're going to cover it with tarp and we're going to allow it to ferment. Now this is going to activate all the enzymes and actually enrich what the corn silage to be in even a more symbiotic relationship once it enters the rumen. It's going to provide energy with a less mechanical and chemical breakdown once in the stomach of our dairy cows. And so that's going to promote to more energy when milking. So that's going to be primarily our milking diet when we talk about dairy feedstuffs. Filler feedstuffs are going to consist, mostly it's going to be whatever cheapest byproducts, if I'm going to be honest, what's available. What I'm used to is cottonseed hulls for a little bit of more fiber in the diet. Some varies from cow to cow, but sometimes having that extra fiber can be very, very beneficial. Next is obviously our corn. And I'm just saying whole corn that wasn't silaged if we think that they need even more energy than what the silage contains when the nutritionist comes out and checks our silage. We're most likely going to add more corn. And then alfalfa and ohe are two forages. So I know dairy and beef very differ. They differ a lot when it comes to the use of alfalfa. In dairies, it is a very predominant thing that we feed our cows alfalfa. However, in a beef, especially a feedlot scenario, that might not be the case. It does run very quickly through the animals, being a legume and high in protein. However, a lot of the times those dairy cows, they need to have all the protein they can, as obviously their BCS, if you were to compare them to a feedlot steer, is very night and day difference. And then our oat hay is more of our filler. So when we're showing cows and we think these cows are a little too big bodied and deep bellied, what we're going to do is we're going to feed out oat hay as a filler. What that's going to do is it's not going to digest as easy as our alfalfa, our corn, our silage, but it will get them to eat just as much, just not digest and absorb as much. That way they don't continue to either gain weight or maintain. For our feedlot feedstuffs, again, it's going to be very, very high in energy. And if we're talking about our scenario here in Oklahoma, I know we don't grow as much corn here as I thought that we did before I moved here for school. But it's probably still going to be the cheapest option when it comes to a high energy feed stuff. And it's going to be mostly corn mixed in with other concentrates to promote maximum growth potential. And so when we talk about feeding these feedlot steers, a really big part of it too is it's more like a dairy situation than a cow-calf situation. We're not just letting these cows and steers run wild and see them 3 times a year to make sure no one's dead. It's going to be more of we're checking on them every day. We're feeding them adequate amounts. So we're going to feed them in stanchions, almost like a dairy, and a very high concentrate, high energy diet. And then what we're going to do is we're going to assess the feed bunk after. If they are licking the feed bunk clean, there's not barely any crumbs left, they're eating everything, that is a sign to the producer that he probably should capitalize and maybe put a little bit more feed because they are eating it all. You don't want them to ever be hungry and not eat. That's not beneficial to a feedlot plan. And vice versa, if there is too much feed, we're obviously going to be wasting money if feed is just sitting in the bunk every day. And so what we were really looking for is that crumb in the bottom of the bunk. We want to just not, I wouldn't even say a layer. We just want to see a little piles here, and there. As long as they're not licking, you can tell they're hungry, then it would be good in a feedlot scenario. So our dairy ration formulation. So dairy cows, we want at least 16% to 19% crude protein. And the reason it's a little bit of a range right there is because that goes from all the way from maintenance to peak lactation. DMI, daily dry matter intake should reach 4% of body weight by 10 weeks post-calving. So as we know in a dairy situation, they're gonna calve, and then once they get the calf out and they start milking, they're gonna go up to that peak. And that really is the most important time to be watching these dairy cows. Again, a big thing is gonna be our ketosis, our out of energy balance. We always want a positive energy balance. And when they go into the negative energy balance, it's most likely always going to result in ketosis. And again, snapping those cows out of it and trying to get them healthy again can be very, very, very challenging. And then obviously our undegradable proteins. Like I said earlier, these are things that don't require the animal itself to provide a lot of energy to break down. Instead, it's just gonna bypass most of the stomachs, get absorbed in the rumen, and it's gonna bypass and go to where it's needed in the body. So I know a big example of this is our tannins. We like to use tannins as our main undegradable protein source in the dairy world. And that is scientifically proven to adequate to milk yield and milk production. For our feedlot ration and formulation, we're gonna gradually increase corn for energy. So again, we're gonna probably, once we get steers and heifers and cows, whatever they may be, into our feedlot scenario, we're gonna most likely start them on a 10% crude protein diet. And the reason we don't want to start them at, say, the 25 yet, is if these are stocker steers and they're coming from eating pasture for the last 6 months of their life, you put them on a 25% crude protein diet, and they will be at risk for a lot of different health symptoms. I know one thing being acidosis is gonna be crucial. You're gonna nuke the rumen with a bunch of different carbohydrates and concentrates, and it's gonna be a way too high energy diet, and the pH of that rumen is gonna drop significantly, causing that acidosis. And so one thing we can do is we're gonna gradually increase it over time. They're gonna be a little bit more older. They're gonna be able to digest those nutrients easier after they've done it for so long. So that's why we wanna gradually increase. And then additives such as protein meals, minerals, and buffers. And so in a feedlot scenario, in a dairy scenario too, yes, we provide our minerals and additives and vitamins. Most of the time it's gonna be through our salt blocks. We use salt blocks because it encourages cows to come and lick them. Salt's a mineral that they need, and more times than less, probably the most mineral that they need in any situation. And then we're also gonna add some other minerals and vitamins into those salt blocks, so we know that if they're licking them, that they should be healthy and that they should have everything they need for their specific stage of production. Our energy analysis. So we have our nutrient evaluation, feeding costs, lab testing, energy availability, and feeding ration. And so it really comes down to the different production and goals that each producer has. When that's being, whether it's in dairy or it's beef. Again, no dairy is the same. Some people want more cows. Some people want to switch to beef on dairy to capitalize on milk because they don't want any more cows. When it comes to feedlot, a lot of people want to finish in less than a year. There could be some that want to finish in over a year because they might not be having the byproducts and feedstuffs available to them, whether it's locally or financially. And so it really comes down to how you want to run your operation and what makes most economical sense to the producer. Protein analysis, again, we're going to do the same thing. Nutrient concentration, nutrient digestibility, feeding systems, and sample collection. And so again, with that crude protein, it's going to be different in both our dairy and our beef in the feedlot scenarios. However, it's still a very, very important nutrient that we do need. And whether it's our milking cows or whether it's, we're trying to get growth and muscle on these feedlot steers, again, it's different to every producer, but it is very, very, very important. Vitamins, minerals, and feed additives. So our common vitamins that are most likely going to be found in our salt blocks, and we've learned the different symptoms of, say, they're lacking on vitamin A or water-soluble vitamin Bs. We can just give them to them straight. However, we're most likely going to put those in those feed blocks. So our common vitamins are going to be our vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin B. Common minerals are going to be calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium. And then common additives are going to be our antibiotics, antimicrobials, and probiotics. And those are obviously for if we can prevent sickness and sickness spreading in the herd. That's going to be very, very beneficial, not only to the herd itself, but economically to the producer in either type of situation. Now for our forages and roughages, types of forages, we have and these are going to be we'll explain the differences in both situations because one's in Oklahoma, one's in California, very, very different in what they grow for ruminant animals. But I know the main, again, forages that we use in dairy is most likely going to be our corn to turn into silage for our lactating dairy animals. And then usually our cheapest and most filling option is going to be that oat head, and that's grown throughout the valley where I'm from. And whether it's show cows or cows on the dairy, most likely going to be filling oat hay, especially in that maintenance period, or even in heifers from 6 months to, by the time they're getting bred, most likely at 14 months. And then also our legumes and silage, I talked about silages, but legumes is going to be a big part too on our dairy side. Our legumes such as alfalfa, such as yellow mustard, such as beans, anything that really absorbs nitrogen through the leaves of the plant and not necessarily takes from the soil as they actually replenish nitrogen through the soil. Those are going to be our very, very high in crude protein diet elements. And so our alfalfa is going to be very heavily utilized in our dairy situations. However, not much in our beef, especially feedlot situations. They're already on a high concentrate diet as it is in the feedlot. And if you keep upping the protein, they're not really absorbing as much. And so it's going to go in one end and go out the back. And that's a waste of money to the producer. And then roughages are defined as feedstuffs that contain more than 18% fiber. So when we think of roughages, we think of our really old, long stem hay. So obviously, the younger the plant is, it's going to contain more protein and easier digestibility with more leaf. The older that plant gets, we'll say, for example, alfalfa, even though alfalfa is a legume that we just talked about. A lot of people will do 4 or 5 cuttings a year where I'm from, just to make sure that they keep, the quality is better when you do cut alfalfa when it's younger. And then when it gets older, it's going to get more stemmy. It's going to have a lot more lignin and cellulose in it, which, yes, cows can digest cellulose, so you don't want a lot. However, when it starts getting to that high lignin percentage, that's when it really starts giving cows trouble. I believe from Dr. Carter, the only animal that has the enzyme ligase to digest woody material and lignin is our termites. So that's why they actually vary in wood. I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, now to talk a little bit about the differences in each of the different production operations. Really quick, I'm going to check my time.
You're at 23 and a half.
23, perfect. Okay, I believe this is my last slide. So when we go into, let's say we're comparing these two to swine nutrition. So obviously our biggest difference here is that swine are monogastrics. They're going to be in the same facility their whole life, much like dairy and poultry. However, in our feedlot situation, we obviously know in our beef sectors that they are going to be, in 4 different places in their lifetime before they end up being culled, being harvested, or going back to the farm to reproduce. And it's different because hogs are a much quicker, easier breedable, easier feedable, maybe not easier, but faster and less biological time lag when it comes to feeding them out and the time of their conception and to the time to finishing. Typically on our feedlot steers, we're going to have a 3-year biological time lag from the time that we actually inseminate its mother, it has a calf, it gets weaned, gets sold to a stocker, goes to a feedlot, gets harvested. So, and then poultry is going to be very similar to our swine and our dairy. They're in one place their whole life. They're 8 weeks. Again, I'm monogastric, so we're not going to feed our swine and our poultry really forages. It's going to be mostly high concentrate diets. Companion animals. So our dogs and cats, usually they're eating very, I wouldn't say processed, but you can check on the bags of feed when you go to the feed store, and it's going to be very, very different. It's going to be a lot of animal meals, fish meals. It's going to be to attract those animals to get to eat that product. and it's going to contain, again, their monogastrics. It's not really going to have roughages. However, I have seen some sometimes in, say, dog feed, walk an aisle at the store. Cow calf, I'm going to compare this one to our feedlot because it's obviously same species, however, very different production goal and production stage in those beef cows' life. So they're most likely going to be out on here in Oklahoma, native pasture, and it's going to be very, very different from our feedlot scenario. They're probably not getting high concentrate diet. I hope they wouldn't be getting high concentrate diet. They are going to be subsidizing and filling them. Say if there's close to being weaned calves, they might creep feed them to start to get them to eat a little bit of grain, get a little growth on them. And compared to the feedlot, it's very, very different. They're on mostly forages and roughages, out on pasture, but eventually they'll come back to feedlot. Stocker, so once our weaned calves at auction get sold, they most likely go to stockers. And stockers are, again, most likely going to be out on pasture, or I know up north in Nebraska, Iowa, where they grow a lot of corn. They're in the corn belt. They're going to graze corn stalks, which aren't too nutritious. They're just looking to grow these animals out, not necessarily muscle and depth. They're just looking to grow these animals as cheap as they can until they get to the feedlot. Equine nutrition. So equine are kind of our favorite child here. It's a monogastric. However, it's not really a true monogastric. It's a herbivore monogastric. So we don't really want to feed concentrates to our equine animals. We can in some senses, just not a lot how we would everything else because it doesn't have that rumen to digest it. And then sheep and goats are going to be actually are most similar to our beef and dairy animals. They are ruminants just like cows, and we're feeding them essentially not the same diet. However, I would say probably about 90% the same stuff. Obviously, there's little things like vitamins and minerals. You can't feed sheep copper. Goats will eat about just about anything you throw in front of them, and those are going to be our differences. And that is the end. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and yeah, thank you.